In this video we'll discuss how you can pass arbitrary argument values to a grid that is opened up from a parent component such as another grid or a UX component. So you can see here we have a UX component that has a button that's going to open up a grid, and when we define the action to open the grid, you can see that we specified that there are some additional arguments that are defined here called arglocal1 through arglocal4, and we're going to basically bind those arguments to various values. So arglocal1 is going to be bound to a control called textbox1 in the parent UX component. Arglocal2 comes from textbox2, and then 3 and 4 are just being set to an arbitrary string. So now basically when I run this UX component and I click the button, then inside my server-side code in the grid, all of the event handlers, including the onGrid initialize and onGrid execute, I'm going to have access to those argument values. So let's go ahead now and press this button, and we can see that we're inside the onGrid execute event right now, and inside onGrid execute we have access to e.rtc.grid arguments, which is basically an arguments object that contains all of the arguments that were passed in to this component. So let's go here and use the argval function to extract the value of arglocal1. So we can see here that arglocal1 is equal to alpha, which in fact is correct because we bound argvalue1 to the whatever value was in textbox1, and that value is currently equal to alpha. So now we're in the onGrid initialize event, and again we can see that e.rtc.grid arguments basically has all of the arguments that were passed in. So now that the grid is actually open, we can press this button here to make an AJAX callback, and when we make an AJAX callback here, again we see our e.rtc.grid arguments, but you'll notice that we also have access to an additional value, which is e.grid arguments, which contains the arguments that were actually used in the grid query. So as you can see here, we're inside the AJAX callback function, and we have access to e.arguments query, which only has one argument because there was only one argument that was actually used in the grid filter expression in the grid SQL, but e.rtc.grid arguments has 5 arguments, which were basically the argument that was used in the query itself and also the 4 other arguments that were passed in. So basically using the e.rtc.grid arguments property inside the AJAX callback and server-side event handler code, we have access to all of the arguments that were passed in when the grid was opened. Thanks very much for watching.